JASIC, and we'll learn more about JASIC later, has a wonderful lineup for us today. What will we learn today?
Well, we're going to be at the United States Capitol building, which Congress first moved into in 1800. We're going to go, this is a shot of the east front right now, and that's the side that most people actually arrive to the Capitol at, which is going to happen today as well. But the first thing that everyone is going to see is the west front of the Capitol, and you can see that there are the 4 flags up. That's usually where we have inaugurations, but what did you say that the temperature was today, Ron?
22 degrees presently. It's approximately 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Saving Time, and let's just say conditions are supposed to, shall we say, deteriorate as in terms of temperature as the wind chill increases. We'll talk about this. This is not all that unfamiliar that we've had inaugurations inside the Capitol building.
Right, it has happened before, but everyone will be arriving on the east front of the Capitol building today. And let's just go through some of the spaces in the Capitol that you're going to see. The first room we want to show you is the President's Room.
Oh.
This gorgeous room.
I wish I could take, and don't tempt me, everyone watching this broadcast into the President's Room. This is a space that's not on the public route. We'll talk about what the President will do here. Look at those floors. Look at the medallion. This is a stunning room on the second floor of the Senate side of the Capitol. Certainly not to be outdone. There are other rooms that we'll highlight, but look as this camera just politely and gently glides through this wonderful space. Well,
yes, well, I think we should also show the House side of the building.
One would think, right?
Well, yes, of course. And so let's go over to Statuary Hall, where, they're preparing for the luncheon already, and we'll talk a lot more about this room later. But the main action of the day is in the Capitol Rotunda. And maybe you are one of those people who came on one of our 8th grade tours. You know, this is the room that always impresses, and they've done a lot of work to set it up for today.
Look at those paintings. To give you a sense of first chronological perspective, this rotunda is 1824 to 26, and the paintings that you're looking at that we're going to go into great detail a little later on are about the Revolutionary War. So we want the world to know about the Revolutionary War. That particular marble statue to the right that the camera's spanning is called the Portrait Monument. The rotunda, the signature room of the United States Capitol.
Yeah, this is it is usually someone's first sort of exciting moment when they come into the Capitol building. What we can see is that it's under that big Capitol dome,
Yes.
right? And so you kind of walk through that doorway, which you can see straight ahead. That's how most people enter the building. And they look up and they always go, wow, it's 180 feet on the inside. And it's just a really gorgeous space.
Emily, people often ask us, what is the rotunda for? Ceremonies. And this ceremony today, which we've heard so much in the last few days about President Ronald Wilson Reagan in 1985, I think it's rather ironic where the stage is set up. President-elect Trump will look at a statue of President Reagan. You know, we were talking about weather, and look at this. Oh, this is, now you're up my alley here. Emily just mentioned 180 feet to a painting called The Apotheosis of George Washington. And friends, there's an artist whose name we're going to talk about at some length, Constantino Bermidi, who painted it. To give you an idea of size, it's the size of a basketball court. But Emily, doesn't this room look familiar to some of us? I shouldn't say some, but quite a few thousands were here just 2 weeks ago.
Right. You know, this is a really a great ceremony that we're going to have today, but it's not the only ceremony that we have in the Capitol Rotunda. And this was the site of President Carter's lying in state just a few days ago. It's not quite 2 weeks ago. And certainly Ron and I were here for that as well.
President Ronald Wilson Reagan laying in state the summer of 2005. I remember distinctly lines extending to the Air and Space Museum, to give you an idea, for instance, that's about
Anita,
5
si
to
usted
7
está buscando un
blocks
grupo callado, está en
away
el lugar
from the
equivocado.
It's a long wait. But today we'll witness the transition of power. Vice President-elect,
J.D. Vance?
how could I forget J.D. Vance from Ohio? J.D. Vance from Ohio and President Donald Trump.
Yes. And, you know, we've had how many of these at the Capitol? And we've had quite a few ceremonies, inaugural ceremonies at the Capitol building. Of course, they weren't all here because
and separate from the president's. When Inauguration Day moved to January 20th in 1937, the vice president's swearing-in ceremony moved from the Senate chamber to the inaugural platform on the Capitol's east front. Although the vice president's swearing-in ceremony lost some of its distinctness after it moved to the east front portico, it gained a public audience and reflected the growing political importance of the vice president as part of the executive branch of government. On April 30th, 1789, in front of New York's Federal Hall, our nation's first president, George Washington, took the oath of office on a balcony overlooking Wall Street. With the ceremony complete, the crowd below let out 3 big cheers, and President Washington returned to the Senate chamber to deliver his brief inaugural address. 4 years later, on March 4th, 1793, Washington's second inauguration happened in Philadelphia, where the government had taken up temporary residence while a permanent capital was being built along the Potomac. The president took his oath in a small Senate chamber on the 2nd floor of Congress Hall. In March of 1801, the seat of the U.S. government had moved to Washington, D.C. The streets were muddy, almost impassable, and overgrown with bushes. On March 4th, 1801, President-elect Thomas Jefferson walked with few attendants and little fanfare to the Capitol building from his nearby lodgings at a boarding house to become the first president to be inaugurated in the nation's new capital city. Upon entering the Senate chamber, now the old Supreme Court chamber, Jefferson immediately took the oath of office administered by Chief Justice John Marshall and addressed the audience gathered in the Senate chamber. After his inaugural address, he finished his day with a meal at the boarding house. But for a few occasions, the inauguration ceremonies for all future presidents and vice presidents would take place in the city of Washington. Andrew Jackson's inauguration on March 4th, 1829, was the first of 35 held on the east front of the Capitol, though Jackson's second inauguration in 1833 took place inside the House chamber because of his ill health and bad weather. Presidents from Martin Van Buren in 1837 to Theodore Roosevelt in 1905 were sworn into office on the Capitol's east front. In 1909, a raging blizzard forced William Howard Taft's ceremony indoors to the Senate chamber. Ronald Reagan's 1981 inauguration was the first held on the west front of the Capitol. Seeking to minimize construction costs and improve visibility for a larger number of spectators, Congress shifted the ceremony from its traditional location of the East Front. Although Ronald Reagan's second inauguration on January 21st, 1985, was forced indoors to the Capitol Rotunda because of bitterly cold weather, subsequent inaugurations have continued the West Front tradition, including those for George Bush in 1989, Bill Clinton in 93 and 97, George W. Bush in 2001 and 2005, Barack Obama in 2009 and 2013, Donald Trump in 2017, and Joe Biden in 2021. The custom of delivering an address on Inauguration Day started with the very first inauguration, George Washington's, on April 30th, 1789. After taking his oath of office on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City, Washington proceeded to the Senate chamber, where he read a speech before members of Congress and other dignitaries. At his second inauguration in Philadelphia on March 4th, 1793, Washington gave the shortest inaugural address on record, just 135 words. Every president since Washington has delivered an inaugural address. While many of the early presidents read their addresses before taking the oath, current custom dictates that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court administer the oath first, followed by the president's speech. William Henry Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address at 8,445 words on March 4th, 1841. John Adams' inaugural address, which totaled 2,308 words, contained the longest sentence at 737 words. In 1921, Warren G. Harding became the first president to take his oath and deliver his inaugural address through loudspeakers. In 1925, Calvin Coolidge's inaugural address was the first to be broadcast nationally by radio. And in 1949, Harry S. Truman became the first president to deliver his inaugural address over television airwaves. Most presidents use their inaugural address to present their vision of America and to set forth their goals for the nation. Some of the most eloquent and powerful speeches are still quoted today. In 1865, in the waning days of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln stated, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt avowed, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And in 1961, John F. Kennedy declared, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." When applicable, following the swearing-in ceremonies on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, the outgoing president and first lady leave the Capitol to begin their post-presidential lives. Traditionally, the president's departure takes place with little ceremony. In 1797, George Washington attended the inauguration of his successor, John Adams. With few exceptions, subsequent departing presidents followed Washington's example. Until the early 20th century, the departing president also usually accompanied the newly elected president on the carriage ride from the Capitol to the White House following the inauguration. In the early 20th century, a new tradition evolved, whereby the outgoing president quietly left the Capitol immediately following the swearing-in ceremony. In 1909, after congratulating President William Howard Taft, former President Theodore Roosevelt left the Capitol for Union Station, where he took a train to his home in New York. Outgoing Presidents Coolidge and Hoover also left the Capitol for Union Station, where they traveled home by train. Outgoing Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Johnson left the Capitol by car. In recent years, the newly installed president and vice president have escorted their predecessors out of the Capitol after the swearing-in ceremony. The members of the JASIC gather on the stairs on the east front of the Capitol building and watch as the new vice president escorts the outgoing vice president and his spouse out of the Capitol through a military cordon. Then the new president escorts the outgoing president and his spouse through the military cordon. Since Gerald Ford's departure in 1977, the former president and first lady have traditionally left the Capitol grounds by helicopter, weather permitting. The first official actions taken by the newly sworn-in President of the United States occur in the President's Room, just off the Senate chamber in the U.S. Capitol. After the departure of the former President and First Lady, the new President gathers there with aides and members of Congress to sign nominations and sometimes memorandums, proclamations, or executive orders. This tradition began in 1981 with President Ronald Reagan. Prior to that time, nominations were often submitted to the Senate on Inauguration Day without ceremony. While the tradition of an inaugural luncheon dates as far back as 1897, when the Senate Committee on Arrangements gave a luncheon for President McKinley and several other guests at the Capitol, it did not begin in its current form until 1953. That year, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, Mrs. Eisenhower, and 50 other guests of the JASIC dined on creamed chicken, baked ham, and potato puffs in the now restored Old Senate Chamber. From the mid-19th century to the early 20th century, presidents left the Capitol after the swearing-in ceremonies and traveled to the White House for a luncheon prepared by the outgoing president and First Lady. In 1949, Secretary of the Senate Leslie Biffle hosted a small lunch for President Truman in his Capitol reception room. They dined on South Carolina turkey, Smithfield ham, potato salad, and pumpkin pie. In 1953, the JASIC began its current tradition of hosting a luncheon for the president, vice president, and their spouses, Senate leaders, the JASIC members, and other invited guests. At the inaugural luncheon in 1981, newly sworn-in President Ronald Reagan announced the release of 52 American citizens who had been held hostage in Iran for 444 days. The luncheon often features cuisine reflecting the home states of the new president and vice president, or the JASIC chairman, as well as the theme of the inauguration. The program includes speeches, gift presentations from the JASIC, and toasts to the new administration. After the conclusion of the inaugural ceremonies and the luncheon, the president and vice president traditionally make their way to the East Front steps of the Capitol, where they will review military troops before leading a procession of ceremonial military regiments, citizen groups, marching bands, and floats down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House for the inaugural parade. The inaugural ceremonies may be a routine event, but it remains a unique symbol of our constitutional system. Today, as we celebrate the inauguration of our next President of the United States, we signal to the rest of the world that we are united as a people behind an enduring republic.
Welcome again to the 60th inaugural ceremonies. If you're just joining us, my name is Emily Boisvert, and I am joined by my colleague, Ron Jackson. We are both visitor guides at the United States Capitol Visitor Center. That was a great video, Ron. What did you think?
Pointed video, specific. It states the purpose, why we're here. And it leads to a trivia question that we're going to have very shortly. But
we'll see how people are paying attention.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Purpose of JASIC, purpose of us, wonderful.
Yeah, I was struck at how technology has changed so much. Here we are, we're live streaming on the internet, something that, past presidents would even know what we were talking about. But, okay, ready, trivia question. You ready, Ron? Okay.
I'm ready.
Whose inauguration was the first to be broadcast on radio?
Repeat the question.
Whose inauguration was the first to be broadcast on radio?
Do I have an A, B, or C? Are you giving me options?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. A, Calvin Coolidge. B, FDR. C, Millard Fillmore. Or D, President Kennedy.
A.
You are correct. Ding, ding, ding.
22 million people heard that broadcast for the first time. His vice president was Charles Dawes of Georgia. And as a matter of fact, President Coolidge would make 40 more addresses via the radio. But I think if you're a certain age, you would instantly think of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's tough to mention Franklin Delano Roosevelt without mentioning Anna Eleanor Roosevelt as First Lady. But that's almost 100 years ago. It happened March of 1925.
Yeah, the 35th inaugural ceremonies.
You mentioned about this medium of broadcast. 1901 is when we start to see images, and people love inaugurations. I want to be specific. Where do inaugurations happen? The People's Building. There are some exceptions, but it's important. It happens here, the Capitol, not the Supreme Court, not the White House, the People's Building.
Right, and I think here we're getting ready for the Rotunda. This has been transformed to be able to host the inauguration. I mean, I'm used to seeing it with thousands of 8th graders. But today it's set up for this very solemn and important event of the transfer of power from one presidential administration to the next.
Expect a voice from the Military District of Washington to introduce all the ceremonial rituals that most will see. The selected guest only. Again, certainly feel for the thousands, tens of thousands that expected to be here to witness this in person on our West Front. But again, weather works. It is not. I mean, this picture that you see looks favorable, but look at the wind. The wind chills low. As a matter of fact, walking in this morning, it was an icy walk. I approached the Capitol in darkness. So, here's the view of the rotunda again.
And I think we can just listen in. I think they're playing right now. Yeah, so the Marine Band looks like they're on the left-hand side of the screen. It is a tradition that they come to inaugurations. It started with Thomas Jefferson. They think that that's the first time that the Marine Band ever performed at an inauguration, and also that President Jefferson is the one who really gave them the moniker, the President's own Marine Band.
President William Jefferson Clinton had a quote about the Marine Band. He said there's a lot of things in Washington he won't miss, but one thing he will miss, the Marine Band.
Yeah, and I can see why. I mean, these are professionals. Look at the pageantry in their uniforms. I mean, it's always a treat when we get to hear them play.
Emily, can you imagine if they were outside, wind instrument, your lips on a trumpet, on a flute?
Yeah. Those brass instruments, they can freeze up really fast. So I bet they're happy that they're inside today.
You mentioned earlier in the broadcast about President Truman being to the right of the George Washington statue. President Truman had the first broadcast, right, in terms of television. That happened in 1947. This is one of our new statues that we have.
From Missouri.
Missouri, yes. On his left hand. When you arrive in the rotunda, get closer to him, look at, make your eyes work. That's a phrase I use to students all the time. Make your eyes work. Look at every part of a statue, their hands, their feet, their expression. It's wonderful. That rotunda floor is made of Virginia sandstone, the same sandstone as the walls.
Right, and I think we're going to go, maybe some people are starting to arrive. So I'm hoping to see who's coming. We're definitely still setting up, but people are going to trickle in as we go through this. So we'll get to see that as well, hopefully. Oh, yep, here we go.
It's interesting, President Reagan's inauguration in 1985, so many were standing. If you look at the footage of it, so many, just about all. We'll talk about John Stennis from Mississippi earlier, who was seated. He was recovering from an illness. But look at this moment as the first group arrive.
Earlier you were talking about the Capitol Dome and how it's made out of cast iron. Imagine all of the work that goes into the upkeep of the Capitol, and that's all done by our big boss, the architect of the Capitol.
Tremendous job.
Yep, and the Capitol Dome has had a couple of restorations over the years. The most recent one was in 2016, but they also just finished this whole restoration of the stone on the outside of the Capitol. I mean, some of it is from the sandstone that you were just mentioning is also on the outside of the Capitol, kind of in the middle of the building, but then on the on the bigger wings with the pediments, that's all marble from Lee, Massachusetts.
Yes.
I have a lot of Massachusetts facts. I know Ron's from Kentucky, I'm from Massachusetts, and we each have our own, we each have our own special facts about where we're from.
Let's listen to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln Choir, please.
Collaboration is key for team success. With
That was I mean, just gorgeous. From the University of Nebraska. That is so hard to do, to change how you're going to stand for a performance like that. I'm a singer, and I've done many performances in all different types of places. That was amazing. That song was One Voice by Ruth Moody. And now I think we're going to see some people arrive, maybe. We're back on the East Front. So hopefully some people are going to start showing up pretty soon.
Our former vice presidents are approaching now. Remember, this will be the inauguration of the 50th vice president, J.D. Vance from the state of Ohio. The vice president is president of the Senate. Again, this angle provided for us by JASIC depicts the Senate side of the Capitol. We expect to see former vice presidents arriving shortly. That was a wonderful rendition. We love music, and see the pan shot here that's getting the entire campus. Well, I shouldn't say when we say East Front, we're talking the area across from the Library of Congress and the modern-day Supreme Court. So oftentimes we say East Front, and someone might say, well, could you be more specific? And I'm hoping that that helps.
Yeah, and we've been mentioning JASIC a couple of times, and we said it at the top, but we'll repeat it again, that JASIC stands for the Joint Committee on Congressional Inaugural Ceremonies. That is quite a mouthful, and that's why we say JASIC. And I think we have a little bit more information from the members of JASIC, specifically the chair of this inauguration's JASIC committee, Amy Klobuchar. So we'll be watching that.
The peaceful transfer of power is at the heart of our democracy. It reaffirms that ours is and always will be a government of, by, and for the people. The inaugural ceremonies are one of our most iconic traditions, where we recognize our democracy and the sacred values that tie us together in front of millions of people across the country and around the globe. The tradition of the inaugural ceremonies at the Capitol dates back to when Thomas Jefferson took office in the old Senate chamber in 1801. It was almost 8 years after President George Washington first laid the cornerstone of the building in 1793, and only one wing of the building had been completed at the time. Over time, the ceremony was moved to the east side of the building and later to the West Front for President Ronald Reagan's inauguration in 1981. Through the years, our dedication to the continuity of our government has remained the same, and today we carry the torch forward yet again. The inaugural ceremonies are the culmination of nearly 250 years of our great American experiment in democracy. Our founding fathers intended for the stability of the country to be rooted in the will of the people. Whether or not our candidate wins, we as a nation recognize that when the president-elect raises his right hand and takes the inaugural oath of office, that signifies the peaceful transfer of power. That's what this ceremony is all about. Since George Washington was sworn in as our first president in 1789, the inaugural ceremonies have taken place every 4 years through times of peace, prosperity, and adversity. Today, we gather at the Capitol, a beacon of freedom, to fulfill the Constitution's promise to protect our enduring democracy for generations to come.
"175 years ago, one former senator and Secretary of State summarized the theme of our 2025 presidential inauguration. He said, "The Constitution of the United States was made not merely for the generation that then existed, but for posterity, unlimited, undefined, endless, perpetual posterity. Our Constitution established this country as a shining city upon a hill, the first nation founded upon an idea, Our Constitution realized the founders' vision of a government striving to protect each person's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our Constitution revolutionized America. It revolutionized the world. It was the first of its kind. In many ways, our Constitution was for the generation who wrote it, but more than that, it was for the generations that followed. It is for us today, and it is for our descendants, the generations that will follow us. The Constitution enshrined our inalienable God-given rights. It immortalized America's commitment to justice and to liberty for all, and the democracy that keeps those ideals alive. After all, the Constitution begins with we the people. Today's inauguration continues the traditions that have upheld our nation and its peaceful transfer of power for almost 2.5 centuries. The theme of the 60th inaugural ceremonies is Our Enduring Democracy, a constitutional promise. Like I said earlier, that theme was described 175 years ago, a decade before the Civil War. But most significantly, it was described at our founding. It is described in our very own Constitution, established to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. This 60th inauguration, only the second time a president has been sworn in for a second time, marks another milestone in securing those blessings for ourselves and the generations to come. May we not forget the rich significance of our peaceful transfer of power today. And may today renew our commitment to the American Constitution and to the American people.
Welcome back to the 60th inauguration. You are looking presently at the east front of the United States Capitol. We look forward to welcoming the children of President George Bush. You see the camera zooming in. What a wonderful video. We just heard from Senator Deb Fisher from Nebraska, the chair of CHASIC, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. So as we continue to zoom in towards the east front, the buildup continues. I know it's noon that the oath of office is rendered, but there's so much to see prior to this on a rather beautiful but cold day.
Right. You can see the ice is still on the lawn out there. A lot of work goes into making sure that all of these surfaces are safe for everyone to walk on. And hopefully we'll get to see former President Bush arrive fairly shortly.
There is a tree that his father planted to Lamar Smith from Texas. I'm a huge fan of our Capitol grounds. So when we talk about names, sometimes I'm going to reference trees. You'll hear that throughout the broadcast. And the type of tree, I know. Like there's a white ash to Speaker Sam Rayburn. It's not far. Matter of fact, there is a tree to Senator Edward Kennedy just to the left. Actually, you can see it in this camera range now. That tree just to the left of the brick wall here.
Oh, and here they are. Here's, this is, I believe, former President Bush and Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush. They're arriving now, coming around to the carriage door. Because at one point people arrived by carriages, right?
Yes.
And so they'll be coming in over on the Senate side of the building in just a few minutes, I think.
I love that Laura and George Bush, President, they met at the undergraduate library, right?
Well, she was a librarian.
You're right, she was a librarian.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep, President Bush, he served 2 terms in office, right?
Yes, yes.
starting in 2001. I don't know. Could I go back that far? That was 20 years ago.
I tell you, his inauguration wasn't exactly warm that day as well, at least the first one, as I recall. Look at everyone. Now, this is our first look at the House side of the Capitol. Our camera views focused on the Senate side. This extension happened in 1857. So for those that have watched a State of the Union or an address in the House chamber, that chamber is December 16th, 1857.
Yeah, from this angle, you can really see the difference between the two types of stone as well. The older stone that is painted sandstone, and then the lovely marble on the other side. But you get a really good view of how the Capitol has been put together through time. But it looks seamless.
Yes. Emily, we have another trivia question for everyone.
We do.
Okay. How many swearing-in ceremonies have occurred on the east front of the Capitol? Again, when we say east front, we're talking about if you're coming from the Library of Congress or the Supreme Court, looking back at the Capitol, how many inaugural swearing-ins have occurred on the east front? Can I give people numbers?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, give me.
Okay, here we go.
Give me a list.
A, 14, B, 24, C, 26, just to throw you off, D, 34.
Well, I read this last night, so I know it's 34. I know it's 34 happened on this side of the building over time.
The point being is this is what a lot of people are used to seeing. Again, if you're a certain age, this side is, my goodness, all of the building is historic, but this is memorable for a lot of people. For President Kennedy, we could go Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not all of them, but
right. I mean, I think being the history nerd that I am, the picture of the inauguration I think of this side of the building is Lincoln's. I mean, I mentioned him before, but I'll mention him again.
Frederick Douglass, who attended the second inauguration of President Lincoln.
Right.
That's when I arrived.
And, they're still building the Capitol, the new dome, when they had Lincoln's inauguration on this side of the building. So we've had inaugurations under all sorts of circumstances. And yet, there is a transfer of power, this enduring democracy that the two senators were talking about. It all goes on. And, I mean, I saw another car come in, but I don't know who's arriving at the moment. But we will definitely see more and more people as we go through. While I'm looking at this, I'm looking at those lanterns.
Oh, sure.
And this landscape was done by Frederick Law Olmsted. If you think, oh, maybe I've heard of his name before, you might have heard of him because he's the one who designed. Ron, you're the expert.
Oh,
Central Park.
Central Park. Every college campus, from Maine to the state of Georgia, Iowa State. There's a tree. Yes, there's a tree named after Frederick Olmsted, not far from this area. You'll have to come and take our Capitol Grounds tour. Not in January, for goodness sakes, in May and June. We anticipate more of dignitaries approaching, more families. Just think about when their day started this morning, with some of them with the prayer breakfast, some with, at St. John's Church, which is historic, just across from Lafayette Park. So, again, this build-up continues.
Yeah, and I think, here we go. Yes, this is the Trump family arriving now.
That's hard to believe. The 2017 inauguration of Vice President Pence and President Trump, it was 48 degrees. You remember that, Emily? It rained. You remember it rained at least part of that day. And although I must say, people are walking as if it's not exactly recreational weather out there, but
they're walking swiftly,
ambitiously.
When I was looking at the inaugural movie that we saw before, the thing I noticed was how tiny Barron Trump was, because he was just a little boy.
Well, not now.
Not now.
No, he's
Yep, now he's in college. And so it looks like some folks are getting out of the cars now. But yeah, I believe all of the president's elect's children, his children are attending today. It's a big event for families, real pinnacle moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There they are, walking inside, yeah.
Reacting to the person in the brown overcoat, moving swiftly. 17, so this is something they're familiar with. This is...
Right, so I think in the green, that's Ivanka, Ivanka Trump.
This fastest, yeah.
Yes. Lovely green jacket. We have
There's
more
someone in
family
black
members
that I
coming in.
just missed. They're doing this rather quickly. That's rather impressively.
Yep, all of this, of course, timed so that we can get to the noon swearing-in ceremony. And yeah, more and more people arriving as we keep on talking, and they're going to fill up the rotunda. Hundreds of people in the rotunda today, and in Emancipation Hall, which is in the Capitol Visitor Center. Capitol Visitor Center is right underneath that plaza that you see. So there we go. There's the rotunda. Everybody will take their seats in there.
I'd like to hear more from the choir. I was rather impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, the choir is a joint choir. Senator Fisher, we just heard from, she's from Nebraska, and so she asked them to come and talk, to sing for the inauguration because she's on the joint committee, and I think they did a really great job, considering they had to change everything at the last minute, like everyone else, because we're honoring the request of the president-elect to hold the ceremonies inside this year, because, as we've been talking about, it's cold outside.
There's going to be I can promise you, a stirring rendition by Lee Greenwood. I can recall my years at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I think the first time I heard Lee Greenwood was 1986. And he sang God Bless America. There was, I can't remember the field, but a lot of people have heard this rendition via television, perhaps radio. There is nothing like it in person. And so not just the words, but look at his expression, look at everyone that's around, and you will be moved. This is one of our great moments of an inauguration. Music. I can recall last inauguration, Garth Brooks, who rendered the national anthem, just literally came in from the East Front, went through the West Front, down to the platform, and then shook someone's hand and walked away. It's just so expect a moment here for Mr. Lee Greenwood singing "God Bless America."
I think that that's going to be in a little while, but before that, I heard that some more people are arriving.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I think former vice presidents are going to serve next. So we're waiting on that. But I agree with you. Music is a very important part of the inauguration. And I'm looking forward to all of the performances that we're going to hear today.
Friends, let's hear from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Steve Scalise, respectively, from Louisiana. I think you'll be touched by this video as well.
The history of the inauguration is in part a history of our people and our government. On our first night, church bells rang and ceremonial cannons were fired to celebrate George Washington becoming president. Every inauguration is a reminder that the people, and not just one man, are the ones ultimately in charge. I've experienced firsthand 2 inaugurations live, and regardless of policies and politics, an inauguration represents a new moment in America as we honor a time-cherished tradition. There's reverence and a sense of togetherness, and that's what our country needs. I really believe President Trump will do a phenomenal job, And we all know the presidency is bigger than even just one man. It takes all of us for the country to succeed, and the American people are the smartest, hardworking, and most generous people in all of the world. We live in the greatest country in the history of the world. And with a great president and the great American people, I truly believe our country can soar to new heights. The inauguration also reminds us of the importance of faith. Every president has taken the oath of office using a Bible. After George Washington was sworn in, he kissed the Bible where he placed his hand. Calvin Coolidge, Ulysses Grant, Benjamin Harrison, so many other presidents did the exact same thing. And for hundreds of years now, presidents have concluded their oath with the words, "So help me God."
So help you God.
So help me God. So help me God.
So help me God.
The United States is a gift from above, and our founders made sure that we knew that our rights come from God and not the government. They boldly proclaimed that as a self-evident truth. So even that phrase, "So help me God," is a reminder that we would be nowhere without heaven's continued care and blessing. We're all excited for the America First agenda that President Trump is leading. And we also have a real sense of reflection on our history. Our grand experiment in self-governance has endured for nearly 250 years now. In fact, it was 250 years ago, this year, that the first shots of the revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord, and Paul Revere made his famous ride. Our people have endured world wars and civil wars. We've endured economic depressions and even terrorist attacks. But no matter what trouble we face, or how many times we get knocked down, we're going to get back up. We'll never be destroyed, and we will always press ahead. The secret of our genius is the timeless principles that we represent. The belief that God and has the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We boldly proclaim that as a self-evident truth. And as we remember all the presidents we've had and the 250 years of history our people have made, we're praying that our country come.
A presidential inauguration, because this shows the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. And it's not just important to the United States, it shows what a real democracy looks like.